Honestly, it's been a challenge. My writing time, I have 3 small kids, and I run my own business, so my writing time wasn't that big to begin with. So, and every book I had to find a new way to adapt. I remember with the first Remy book, I had one child and she was a baby, and I used to wake up 5 to 7 and I used to be able to get a little time in to write. And then I had 2 kids, and then I found there was no way for me to write at home ever because you're always up at night. And so I wrote the second Remy book entirely on the road while traveling for work, because I used to have to travel a lot. I used to travel probably a week out of every 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the year. And I dedicated all my time when I was on the road, whether I was on a plane or a train or an airport or a hotel, to working on my fiction. And over about 3 years, I wrote the draft. And then the pandemic hit. We had 3 kids, and Dungeon Jest was written entirely by hand on pads of paper with pencils, while I hung out with my 2-year-old, who decided for about 8 months to wake up between 2 to 3 in the morning until about 7 and just like wanting to watch cartoons. And every day for like 8 months. So I just brought a pad of paper down with me and pencil and wrote it all out by hand while I hung out with him, while he had Eggo waffles and watched, Corey Carson and all the other fun stuff.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 381 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode has an interview with Andrew Snook. Andrew Snook is a professional writer and editor who has worked as a newspaper reporter, a feature writer, a magazine editor, and is an author of 4 different books. Snook is also passionate about promoting independent authors, independent bookstores, and independent publishers. And yes, there is a difference between an independent publisher and an independent author. In 2023, he founded Canadian Independent Publishers Magazine, which is dedicated to offering a platform for showcasing Canadian writers, Canadian bookstores, and Canadian independent publishers. We talk about the magazine, his writing, and so much more, and that's coming up later in this podcast, along with a special offer related to his magazine, which will be of particular interest to my Canadian listeners. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by a book co-authored by my colleagues Maddie Dalrymple and Michael Aron. From Page to Platform, How to Succeed as an Author-Speaker. A key takeaway from this book is the importance of being authentic. It's something I truly, strongly believe in. In the same way that you likely work to find your unique author voice, you can find a parallel voice for use on the stage. Maddie and Michael will help you with drafting a stage persona that you can use to connect deeply with your audience, all the while ensuring that you stay true to yourself. Now, this book covers everything from setting your goals as a speaker to mastering different types of talks. And whether you want to establish your expertise in a particular area, make some extra money, build a community, or simply share your passion, From Page to Platform helps you craft a strategy that will fit your personal and professional goals. You'll find From Page to Platform an ebook, print, and an AI-narrated audio on all the major online retailers. And you can find more information at theindieauthor.com/platform, and that's indie with a Y. And yes, that is a word from this episode's sponsor, but I also want to give a big shout out to the patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. And a huge thank you and shout out this week to Buy Me a Coffee supporter, Nikki Gerlain. thank you, Nikki, for your extreme generosity. Please note that your generosity and the generosity of all my patrons is being shared back to the entire Stark Reflections listening community. That's right. Coming up later in this episode, as I mentioned earlier, you'll hear a bit more about the funding from my awesome patrons and additional generous coffee buddies like Nikki who support this podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. And that's being shared with listeners via a special offer, because community is so key and so important to me. And if we can't prop one another up, come on, what are we here for? So again, thanks to all my patrons over at patreon.com/darkreflections. And Nikki, thank you again over at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. I want to make sure that we can rechannel some of those funds back into this awesome community of listeners that I have here. All right, let's roll a bumper and get on to comments. Over on the show notes at starkreflections.ca for episode 379, Simplify Your Life and Work with Dre Baldwin, Lisa M. Lilly said, "Thank you for talking in your rambling section about doing things that don't add to your income. It's so easy as creators and writers to feel like everyone else has figured out how to monetize all aspects of creative work. It reminds me there's nothing wrong with pursuing projects I love, even if other work would more reliably and quickly pay off in a monetary sense." Thank you, Lisa, for that comment. It's so true. I mean, there is so much about our creative lives and our writing lives that are not necessarily about money, and it's passion. And I think that, I mean, a lot of the stuff that drives me is passion. And I guess because it's funny, as I'm working on this latest project, One Hand Screaming 20 Haunting Years, I'm realizing I've been at this writing thing for 40 years. I mean, I got my first rejection in 1984, my very first rejection on a story that I submitted. So I've been at this for 40 years. And for most of that time, there was no money coming into me, or at least in the first whatever. I think my first money as a writer came in 1992. And again, I think that was $10 or $25. So it's not anything I could write home about. And probably the cost of stamps I spent that year was $300 or $400. So I guess I'm used to doing it for the passion. And if the money thing works out, then the money thing works out. But thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you sharing that comment. And it reminds me that even though I do ramble on sometimes now, like I do before the interview, and in my reflections after the interview, that sometimes that can be important, because as I'm chewing on things and thinking about them, chances are so are you. And I love that. So thank you, Lisa, for letting me know what you were thinking about after that. I love hearing what folks think when they're listening to the podcast, because it makes it more of a back and forth, more of a conversation. And you can leave comments like Lisa did over at starkreflections.ca, over on the YouTube channel where the audio only gets punted in, as well as a variety of other places where I can find your comments. And thank you guys for your comments. It just reminds me that there's actually somebody, well, not on the other side of this microphone, I guess on the other side of the headphones or other side of the speaker, depending on how you listen to the podcast. All right, I'm going to roll a bumper and do a little bit of a personal update. The first note for my personal update is I was a guest on this week's episode of the Creative Pen podcast with Joanna Penn, and I was talking about my forthcoming book for writers, A Book in Hand. And this is all about selling physical books, and in particular doing it in person. Now, something Joanna's not all that comfortable with, and we chat about that. It was a really fun conversation. I mean, it's always fun when I get a chance to chat with Joe, but that episode's out. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Of course, if you're a listener to this podcast, chances are you already know and already subscribe to the Creative Pen podcast. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's just such an amazing show. And again, always an honor to talk to Joe. I know, Joanna and I talk semi-regularly, but it's also fun to turn on the mic and record some of those conversations. And I noticed that Joe had shared a highlight from that episode, so I'm just going to quickly roll a short bumper and play that, and then I'll get back with the rest of my personal update. As things move and progress in this industry, doubling down on you and your authentic self is key. Especially in a high-tech digital world where AI-charged content can surpass even those rapid release people, it's the connections that people crave. Connections are the most fundamental reason for storytelling and for writing in books. And there's so many readers out there who want a connection with a writer. So again, that was just a teaser, just a little clip. It popped up as I was editing this podcast. I noticed it popped up on YouTube. And I thought, that's kind of cool. I like that. That's a good soundbite. And again, Harley Christensen also shared over on Twitter/X, also shared a really great, I guess, quote from that. And this was over on Twitter, and Harley shared this on September 23rd. Connections are the most fundamental reason for storytelling and for writing and for books. Of course, obviously, that's what you heard in that clip. Other news is I this past weekend was in South Dakota for the South Dakota Festival of Books. I was there as an author guest. My publicist Mickey Mickelson of Creative Edge Publicity got me there, as well as Robert J. Sawyer, Canadian science fiction author, and Ado Van Belkom, Canadian horror writer. And the three of us ended up traveling together because we were all going from the Toronto airport. And it was a fantastic conference, just lovely people, really wonderful folks. And I did a talk on the 7 Ps of publishing success. And again, that's a talk that's kind of catered to the things that successful authors do, whether they're traditionally published or self-published. And this conference had a significant lean towards traditional publishing. And so in my office hours, I had office hours one day. It was, I think, about 3 or 4 hour stretch where people could just come in and ask me anything about writing and publishing and whatever. And of course, I helped them out, and I helped people out with all kinds of, here's some access to some free tools you may not be aware of. And then I also did Ado and I, who have both edited horror anthologies, and I've edited other anthologies. We did a session on what it's like from the editor's point of view, again, to help writers who are thinking about submitting to different anthologies. So we kind of shared the pros and the cons and the goods and the bad and the things you should know as well. And of course, just had a great opportunity to hang out with Ado and Rob and so many of the writers. And I met Amanda Faith, who I picked up her book on social media for everybody. And I'm going to have her on a future episode because I sat in on her session about social media. And let me tell you, social media, just like marketing in general, people get all overwhelmed and anxious about it. But she really drove home some really fine points that we forget as authors because we get so excited about wanting to share things and thinking of it as a tool for selling. She just really drove some things home. And she even, in that session I was in, she had offered some tips that I've tried and understand now how and why they work. In particular, on this case was Instagram. But I'm going to have her come on the show in a future episode so she can talk more about that, and I can kind of hone in on specific platforms and things that authors might want to consider. But again, it was a fantastic conference. I loved it. The people there were so amazing. I was there as an author guest, so this was like they were paying and footing the bill for me to go there. And it's always an honor when you get treated so wonderfully like that. Somebody met us at the airport. It was an hour drive from Sioux Falls over to Brookings, which was where this took place at the university. And our hotel was not too far. It was about a mile down the road, so I even walked it a couple times instead of getting a ride to the university where it was being held. But this is something that happened at the conference that I think is important to reflect on. Is in one of the sessions there was an author in a discussion who'd heard someone mention Goodreads. You just sort of casually mention, oh yeah, and on Goodreads you can do this. And he's like, what's Goodreads? And I'm not saying this because, oh wow, people don't know about Goodreads. I'm saying this because there's so much to know and there's so many different aspects of our industry that of course not everyone's going to know everything. And so it's so important that we don't forget to talk about the basic things and to remember that there's so many authors out there who haven't yet had the opportunity to see the really cool tools that are available, like on the digital or indie publishing side of things. Most of the authors that I was there with, for them, it was all about the books and all about the print books, I should say. And ebooks were sort of secondary, wasn't even a thought. And that's a reminder for authors who are mostly only thinking digitally and indie. And it kind of ties back into my book in hand, because most people who read still read print books, and they are very, very important. So I learned something as somebody who's there to help educate other writers, that it's okay to go back to the basics, because the people are at different phases in their learning careers, and they may have learned this other thing that I don't know, and I know this thing that they don't know. So sharing and communicating and networking is just so critical. So fantastic conference. Had an amazing time. I am not going to talk any longer because I've babbled on too long, but I do have so much coming up with my book launch on October 2nd. At Counterpoint Brewing with the book One Hand Screaming and the beer tie-in. So I'm pumped and thrilled and excited as that's going to roll on, and I'll probably be talking about how that went in next week's episode. But without further ado, let's roll the slightly longer bumper and get into this conversation with Andrew Snook. Andrew, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Now, the time of this interview may not be when this actually episode gets released, but you are celebrating the first anniversary of Canadian Independent Publishers' beautiful, glossy magazine, 8.5 by 11 for those listening. And well, actually, no, it's bigger than 8.5 by 11. What's the actual dimension on this?
Oh, I think you're right. I think it's 8.5 by 11.
Is it? Oh, yeah. Okay, I got an 8.5 by 11 sheet. I just compared it. There you go. It just looked a little bit wider, probably because of the design as well. But it's for Canadian independent publishers. It's supporting Canadian independent authors, illustrators, bookstores, independent bookstores, and publishers, meaning like small press, in indie presses, as opposed to indie authors who run their own press. So, Andrew, it's been a year. Happy anniversary.
Thanks, Mark. It's been an interesting adventure diving into it, starting my own magazine. So I've been in magazines for a long time, and it's the first one I've ever created for myself. So,
well, I wanted let's dig back into that. So you didn't just launch this. I mean, you're a writer as well. We'll talk about your fiction and stuff like that. But so you've worked in magazines prior to. I'm curious about the inspiration for starting. I think the first time I saw you was a year ago at When Words Collide in Calgary. This was in August 2023, and I think you had just recently launched Canadian independent publishers.
Yeah, I launched it at When Words Collide, so it was kind of fun to celebrate the 1 year anniversary again at When Words Collide. So no, it's a passion project. I mean, as an independent author myself, I first self-published my first thing, a novella. Oh my God, 2004. This is gonna really date me. While I was a student.
Wait, 2004? Like you and me, buddy, we have that in common. 20 years ago, we self-published books before all the cool kids discovered it.
Right
I didn't know that it goes back that far.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, it was terrible.
Well, that doesn't matter, but you did it, right? You took the chance. Yep. You reached forward and said, I'm going to do something new. Because again, we're talking 10 years before ebooks were really a thing. Not quite 10 years, but almost 10 years before ebooks really took hold.
Oh, for sure. And I was just really excited. I'd written, this is the first long form fiction I had written, and I just really wanted to get into people's hands. So I self-published it. I went on to Lulu, I think it was back then.
Okay, so you used Lulu. So you used that. You didn't go to a local printer. You went with Lulu.
Yeah.
But Lulu was, the founder, the owner is Canadian, even though it's a U.S. company. Owner of the Tie Cats, Bob Young.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, founder of, because he was from Hamilton. When I was in Hamilton, I was chatting with Lulu when I was getting into print on demand with my own bookstore. I was like, oh my God, it's Bob Young. He owns the company. He's like Hamilton guy. Sorry.
Oh, right on.
So cool. Okay, so So you did that first book using Lulu back in 2004. You've since done other products, and you've taken the reins yourself on those ones as well?
Yeah, so yeah, that was I used Lulu for two novellas I wrote in 2004 and 2006 or 2007.
Okay.
And then my fiction kind of got put on the shelf for a while. I decided in 2009, I quit my job and changed careers and decided I wanted to write for a living.
Okay.
And I went out and moved to Ottawa and became a newspaper reporter.
Okay.
Um, I went back to school for journalism at Algonquin in 2009, 2010.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And yeah, I worked in newspapers till the end of 2011. And then I moved to back home, which is Mississauga. My wife and I were gonna planning on having kids, and we wanted to be close to the grandparents who are all in Mississauga. So I started looking for jobs in the Toronto area, and I found one in business to business magazines, and I thought, oh, let's try it out. And so we moved back, and I started my career in B2B publishing, and I've been involved in B2B publishing since. I'm still active in it. I still do a lot of writing and editing for companies.
So what's business to business? Like a business to business magazine, the difference between like a trade magazine that you'll find on shelves? Let's just explain that a
Yeah,
little
they're
bit.
they're typically very niche, very specific industries. Each one is for. I've written for, I think I've worked on more than 50 now at this point.
Really?
I do a lot of freelance writing for them, and I've been a full-time editor. Before I started my own company, I was a full-time editor from 2011 to 2019, working on a variety of industries, mechanical sector, forestry,
Right.
bioenergy, construction, different types of publications. And then in 2019, I decided to start up my own company.
Wow.
And so yeah,
Cool. That's amazing. So you had done books yourself, as a pioneer. You worked in the magazine industry, and then the spark just before, like when you launched Canadian independent publishers. I remember when I saw you, I was like, "Hey, well, I've never seen this. This is a beautiful glossy, and it's one that's actually available. Like it's not just like an online zine where you go and you download a PDF or something like that. It's actually a beautiful glossy magazine. You have articles. You spotlight different independent bookstores in every issue. You spotlight different authors. I've been lucky enough to be one of them because your focus is on Canadian independent folks. So let's talk a little bit about the logistics then of producing the magazine. It's a quarterly, right?
it's 6 times a year.
Oh, it's six times a year. Oh my God,
Yeah,
every 2 months then. Wow.
yeah,
Is that bi-monthly? Is that how that?
yeah. I'd say so, right?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, yeah. So it's 6 times a year. It's I the content is largely written by me. There are some submitted articles every issue,
Okay.
uh, but I don't it doesn't have the budget for hiring freelancers right now. Maybe it
Right.
would that'd be great. Um, I'd love to support freelance writers. It's just not there yet.
Well, I can imagine the cost to produce this, you're probably still bleeding on it, right? It's not
Yeah,
earning it's
no,
costing you more than it earns.
yeah, it's still in the bleed. I mean, I'm trying to be careful with controlling costs and things, but it hasn't gone into profit yet. Yeah, I'm
Wow.
kind of in a funny place because I don't the the purpose of the magazine wasn't to generate massive profits. It was to help showcase indie
Right.
authors and indie bookstores and all their allies. So but I also don't want to bleed money forever. So I'm trying to find a balance
Well,
in
if it at
that.
least doesn't lose money, if it breaks even or if there's a little bit of extra cash so that you can do things like pay contributors. So let's talk about that. So anyone who's listening to this now, if they are a writer who has an interesting story about a Canadian independent bookstore or maybe something that would be of interest related to, independent publishing in Canada, any of my listeners, is there a way they could reach out to you, understanding that you are unable to pay, but you never know, right? Sometimes, sometimes working, well, especially in the publishing industry and traditional publishing, interns don't get paid when they first start in
Yeah.
the hopes that it builds their resume, etc. But I'm curious, are you willing to work with people who may be willing to do interviews or articles about various locations just to
Yeah,
help?
I'd be happy to chat with people about it for sure. Especially, if there's people who are looking to build a portfolio. I understand. I was there at one point.
Yeah,
I mean, when I started, I was 30 when I went back to school for journalism, and I had no portfolio, and I had an 8-month program because I already had a BA.
right.
And I said, okay, in 8 months, I need to be working.
Right.
and I had no portfolio. So I went around to all over Ottawa, just kind of asking people, this is my situation. I just looking to build a portfolio. If you have anything I can write, I'd be happy to do it. Um, and luckily, and that's how I built my portfolio to get my first job. So,
Right. So it was
um,
kind of like a hey, even was it even like some of the weekly circulars where they're very like one
they
person
were
staff.
they were instrumental. I'm very sad that they're gone because they were a huge opportunity to build portfolios as a new writer. I was really lucky. There was an editor for the Canada Courier Standard. I think the paper's gone now, but it was in Canada, Ontario.
Yeah.
It was Blair Edwards, and I remember he had given me the opportunity to go cover a hockey game. He didn't really like covering hockey, so I went to cover a junior game. I love watching hockey, so to me it's just kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
went out and covered a game for him, and then I brought it back to him, and he said, "This is good. I can't promise that your articles will run every week, but if you want to go cover a game every week, I will try my best to publish them." And so I did. Every week I go out and
Yeah.
I write up articles for him and take pictures, and that led to an internship with Metroland, who owned the paper, and then from there I got my first job at Weekly Community Papers in the Perth
Hmm.
Courier, Smith Falls this week in the Ottawa Valley. So
Huh.
it was a lot of fun too. So
Oh,
so I
that's
get it.
cool.
If people are looking to help to build portfolios, they can reach out to me for sure. I try and
Yeah,
give.
and I know you do want to. You would love you'd love to have income so you could actually pay people. So, and that's the other thing. And I'm going to make this offer here right off the cuff. We're throwing this in here. Thanks to the generosity of my awesome patrons, the people who support this podcast at patreon.com/dark reflections. What I'd like to do is offer to any listeners who happen to be Canadian. I'm sorry, this is a Canadian content magazine. So if you are Canadian, what I would love to do to help support Andrew in this magazine is I would love to purchase an ad for you, maybe about your books or whatever, to go into the magazine. Because you do, right? Advertisements. You do have advertisements from, I see there's
Yep.
something from Friesen Press. You've got you've got an advertisement from Stark Reflections on writing and publishing. Oh, that's exciting. But you also have a few different advertisements throughout the magazine as
Yeah.
well, and that helps fund the projects, right?
It totally does. And yeah, and I run every so often I've had people reach out for advertisements in the newsletter because I have a monthly newsletter that goes out.
Yeah,
And yeah, no, any support is greatly appreciated and
cool.
for the offer.
Yeah. Well, again, it helps you and it helps my awesome listeners. Thanks to, and again, this is I'm going to be taking the funding that comes from the patrons who support this podcast and the buy me a coffee people who've dropped money there instead of the monthly fee. Take money out of that fund and pump that into propping up, giving back to the Stark Reflections community. So again, I'll have a form that people can fill out to indicate their interest, and then I can we'll figure out what we can do to help you both. But you have something else going on, and I think well, I'm not sure if this episode's gonna get out in time or not. But let's talk about you've had the Flash Fiction Contest, which I guess closes October 15th, 2024, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the current date for it. I might extend it. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had a handful of submissions come in. It's good. I'm hoping to get a lot more in. I'd love to get as many
Okay.
people in there as possible. It's even if you don't win, I would love to have enough finalists to put together a short story collection that could be available. It could be available in print, but it could also be available for free to download just as a way to get authors an opportunity to showcase their work to people on another platform.
Right.
I just want to help people just get, more opportunities to show their work to people. So
Cool. Awesome. And again, I guess one of the requirements is you're probably looking for Canadian authors for this, right?
yeah, I'm looking for Canadian authors. I'm trying really hard, and it's not against anyone who's not Canadian, obviously, but
Yeah.
I just find Canadians don't have a lot of options in terms of ways to promote their work, which is why I started the magazine in the first place.
Yeah.
I released my first full-length novel in 2015, and I've released 4 books total since then.
Right.
And
Right.
one of the biggest challenges I've found has always been finding those opportunities to just to let people know who you are and showcase your work.
Right. And so as I'm just as you're talking, I believe I encountered
Yes.
you in person with Remy's Dilemma. Was this your first
That,
book?
you know what? Yes, that was our first full-length book, and I remember that conversation. It was our first conversation was while you were exhibiting at Hamilton Comic Con.
Yeah, Comic
That's
Con.
where that's
I
when it
can't remember
was.
if it was the downtown or when it was up at the
It
airport,
was
but
in the air. It was in the air. The museum.
it was at the
Yeah,
museum at the airport. Okay, because they've kind of toggled back and forth over the years.
yeah,
Yeah, that was the first time we had met. I think our tables were just around the corner from one another
yes,
as
yeah.
well.
And I was
So
trying to get information, and you were kind enough to tell me all about all about the self-publishing world, and I greatly appreciated that. You've always been very helpful. So,
cool. So
and thank
yeah. So let's go back to. Thank you. I just as you were talking about, like, oh yeah, I think I have a signed copy of. So the flash fiction contest.
yeah.
The way you define, is it under X number of words? How
Yeah,
you
I said
define?
1,000 words or less
Okay.
to try and keep it sort of quick and easy, and it's not a huge time constraint for people who want to make something new. So
Right. And so it's original works that haven't been published from a Canadian author, 1,000 words or less. So again, if you're a Canadian author and you're listening to this, take a look. There'll be a link to Canadian Independent Publishers.ca where you can find about the contest. So if it does get extended beyond October 15th, and I'm going to try and get this episode before October 15th, maybe some of my listeners will have a chance to get their fiction in there. So how's that working? How's the process working for that flash fiction, like the contest?
so there's a small reader fee. I think it's $25. Just then again, that's just to try and help keep the magazine supported.
Hmm.
And you can go through. There's a link to where you can pay, and there's a link to where you can email me. You can just email me at asnook@canadianindependentpublishers.ca your story,
Right.
and I will happily collect them. So
Okay, and I'm going to offer this other thing right now too, because I just want to support my readers, my listeners, and I want to support this magazine and this contest because I think it's awesome. If you're a Canadian listener and you're interested in submitting your flash fiction to Andrew's flash fiction contest, I will support the first four people who contact me. I will pay the entry fee for you on your behalf so you can get your flash fiction submitted to the contest. Again, it helps me support this wonderful magazine. It helps me support my awesome listeners because, my listeners support me as well. I mean, just by listening, it's a great way that they support
awesome. Well, thank
me.
you
So,
very much for that, Mark. That's fantastic. That's
I'm just, for some strange reason, I'm just feeling really, really generous today. So maybe because I just finished a Kickstarter and I'm really excited about what the community has given to me, and I want to be able to give back to the community. Okay,
Congrats
all
on
right.
that. I'm looking forward to my copy.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah,
I ordered it.
I may be getting my first copy back from the local printer tomorrow morning, on Friday
Sorry.
morning, the Friday lucky Friday the 13th. My printer said we'll try and get it for lucky Friday the 13th for you, and then I can get my bulk order in, which is going to a Canadian warehouse, and of course, and then I have the copies that I can ship off. Okay, all right. So let's get back to your novels. Okay, so Remy's Dilemma, which you published 2000, you said was 2015?
15. Yeah.
2015. So you've published a few books since then, right?
Yeah. So I wrote a sequel called Remy's Dilemma Special Delivery in 2019.
Okay.
And that was followed by I had created a like dice rolling monster battling game book called Dungeon Jest, The Ruby of Power,
Oh, cool.
where
Cool.
you are a court jester where you battle you are punished by your king and queen, and they decide to punish you by sending you out on the noble quest of obtaining the Ruby of Power, which is their favorite way to dispatch people they dislike.
I think I have that too. It's like, I know
There
that
it is.
book. I have.
Uh,
I forgot that was you as well. Because I remember that sounds familiar. I remember that. Oh, and look, I have a signed copy. So, oh, that
right
is really
on.
cool. That's awesome.
It's yeah, it's yeah, people gamers have really enjoyed it. So
Oh, that
uh
is cool. I love
then
that.
I made another one. This was something a little different for me.
Yeah.
I kids book. So
Okay.
this was for children kind of ages 6 to 9, and it's an introductory chapters, like introductory chapter book.
Oh,
I
cool.
made it. My own daughter had some struggles with transitioning from like the short kids books to larger novel, to like
Yeah.
novel style. And I
Right.
wanted to make something that was kind of in between. So parents had something to offer their kids. So it's got like it's in a chapter format, but it's like big letters, lots of color, lots of like fun pictures,
Yeah, so it's not as intimidating,
fairly
right?
simplistic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's longer than a typical children's book, traditional children's book, but not as long as a novel. So it's just kind of getting them more excited about the format. So
And
so it
what was
doesn't
that one
feel
called
as
again?
intimidating. This is called the Snooky Cookie Crew and the Cranberry Cookie Cruncher. It's a really long title. But I decided to make my kids had always asked me
Oh,
to
and
make
it is long. Yeah,
it's about 70 pages.
yeah.
But my kids had always asked me to make a kids book, so I said, sure, I'll do it. And then what I didn't tell them was it's all of them as the characters.
Oh my
So
God, that's
and
amazing.
then
I love
and
that.
the illustrator's son as well. So it was like
All
a
right,
fun.
that's cool. Then they can either hide from it for at a certain point in their life and then own it again with pride. I
Yeah,
know children go through that phase, right? Where
yeah.
parents are embarrassing, but
Well, this was 2022, so they were pretty young. I mean, they were 9, 7, and 4, and they completely lost their minds when they saw the book. They thought it was like the coolest thing in the world. I'm sure when they're teenagers, at least one of them will come back to me and be like, "Dad, I can't believe you embarrassed me like this."
yeah. And then maybe once they're in their mid-20s again, they'll be cool about it again, going, "Yeah, it was such a cool thing that you did." Like how many parents do that? All
I'm
right.
sure I'll go through phases. So
So I want to get into something pretty heavy and pretty hard hitting, and this is something that I worry about. So you wanted to create a platform to help promote independent authors, small press publishers, independent bookstores, like this independent spirit in Canadian publishing because you saw a hole, you filled it. How has that impacted your writing? I mean, it's got to be have taken away a lot of your writing time, right?
yeah, honestly, it's been a challenge. My writing time, I have three small kids, and I run my own business, so my writing time wasn't that big to begin with. So,
Right. Yeah.
and every book I had to find a new way to adapt. I remember with the first Remy book, I had one child and she was a baby, and I used to wake up 5 to 7, and I used to be able to get a little time in to write. And then I had 2 kids, and then I found there was no way for me to write at home ever because 'cause you're always up at night. And so I wrote the second Remy book entirely on the road while traveling for work, 'cause I used to have to travel a lot.
Okay.
I used to travel probably a week out of every 3 to 5 weeks, depending on the year, and I dedicated all my time when I was on the road, whether I was on a plane or a train or a airport or a hotel, to working on my fiction, and over about 3 years, I wrote the draft. And then the pandemic hit, we had 3 kids, um, and Dungeon Jest was written entirely by hand on pieces of on, like, pads of paper with pencils while I hung out with my two-year-old who decided for about 8 months to wake up between 2 to 3 in the morning until about 7 and just, like, wanting to watch cartoons. And
Wow.
every day for, like, 8 months, so I just brought a pad of paper down with me and pencil and wrote it all out by hand while I hung out with him while he had Eggo waffles and watched, Corey Carson and all the other fun stuff, so
Wow. That is amazing. But again, on top of working full time, writing, publishing a magazine six times a year, you're also you've decided to do that schooling thing again.
yeah, I went back to school. So I've always wanted to teach. And so the last couple of years I've run writing workshops for small kids at a local school, kind of grades 1 to 6, get them excited about creative writing. And it's been a
Mhm.
lot of fun. And so I do that through the school year. And I've always really wanted to teach at like the college level. Originally it was for sociology because that was my original degree was sociology.
Right.
And so my original plan many years ago was to become a college professor. That didn't work for a whole bunch of reasons, but I've still always had that in the back of my head that I've always wanted to teach. And I've gone and spoken at the college level to people, and I really enjoy it. And I really want to share, my knowledge of the industry of writing for a living and editing for a living, and my fumbling through self-publishing for 20 years and all the wonderful mistakes
Yeah.
and share them, right? So I decided to go back to school and start up my MFA about a year ago. So I'm taking it sort of a few courses a year.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm trying to squeeze that into my schedule wherever I can.
Because who
Luckily,
needs sleep, right?
I had to I took a course, like it's all remote because I don't even know
Right.
how I'd be able to even
Yeah.
get into a classroom at this
So
point.
you're taking it from where then?
Southern New Hampshire University. It's completely online.
Southern New Hampshire University. So there's no in-person component at all. It's all online.
No. And the greatest, but this is the where adapting to finding ways to write fiction really worked out. So when I was looking at my options, SNHU, their MFA thesis is to create a work of fiction. You have to write a book. So I was like, boom, there's my time. There's my time to work on fiction. And now I'm also trying to finish the Remy series because I have a third book that I'm about, I'd say about 60, 70% of the way through.
Right.
Right. And I got through a big chunk of that actually, because for the first time in my life, I decided to try NaNoWriMo last year, and I got through a big chunk of the book doing that, but I couldn't keep the momentum going because doing a month of just basically waking up at 4 a.m. to get some work on fiction done. I'm getting too old to be constantly waking up at like and getting like there's only so many 3-hour nights I can deal with in a row
Yeah.
of sleep. So but yeah, I'm plugging away. My hope is this November I plan to do NaNoWriMo again to finish the third Remy book. That's my goal anyways.
Right. Yeah. And the idea there is, in 30 days you write 1,666 words a day, so it keeps you kind of accountable to get those words done. And there's something about publicly declaring you're going to do that kind of gives
Yeah.
you a bit more motivation,
Well,
right?
and I always feel like you need to manage your expectations too. Like with everything I've got going, I didn't really ever expect to get 50,000 done,
Right.
but I think at the end of the month I got around 25,000 done,
Well,
which
it's
was like
25,000 more than you would have
it's
had,
it's
right?
progress.
Yeah.
That's really more than anything. It's progress, so I'll take
Yeah.
it. So
All right, so a few questions. I want to go back to a few things we talked
yeah,
about. I forgot to ask. So anyone who's interested in your magazine, it's available in some stores. Is it something that people can get a subscription to?
you can get a subscription. It's not really in any retail stores right now, but if you go to CanadianIndependentPublishers.ca in the contact us section, there is a link to be able to order a print subscription.
Okay.
So because I think it's important to still offer that. I know, yes, my life would probably be easier if I didn't have a print component to deal with.
Yeah.
But I want it. I feel like all the removal of the print, I don't like it in terms of making sure everything's accessible to as many people as possible.
Right.
Because some people really still want print.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're becoming a smaller part of the population, but I don't want to take that from them.
Yeah.
And I love print, so
Yeah, of
I still
course.
love
Yeah.
my print magazines. I love my print books. It's nothing against the digital issues and
Yeah.
Kobo readers and all that kind of stuff, the Kindles, but
Yeah.
it's just not my thing. My face is in a computer all day. When I want to relax, I want it out of the computer. So like
Yeah.
I
No,
love
I know.
reading print.
Well, it's one of the reasons I like Indie Author Magazine. Yeah, there's the digital component, which I also get, but I prefer just having the book in my hand, and I can easily slip it in my laptop bag when I'm traveling, and sometimes savor the reading because it's kind of like, oh, it's nice and easy to take in my laptop bag. It's nice and thin, and it's colorful, and there's whatever. So, can people order any specific issues of the magazine if they're
If
interested in
they,
that as well?
yeah, if they want to, I do keep an archive of some copies. So
Yeah.
if they want a specific issue, they can reach out to me.
Yeah.
Just email me, asnook@canadianindependentpublishers.ca, and I do keep a small collection of archives specifically for that, so I can send them out
Cool.
to people.
Awesome, awesome. And so some of the other questions I wanted to go back on, you'd said I'd made a lot of mistakes because again, you've been self-publishing, you started 20 years ago. Can you share one or two things that you wish you'd known because you made the mistake and then you went, oh no, I wish I'd known this.
Oh,
Share with my listeners. And again, we'll keep it down to one or two things. It's probably a dozen. Like with me,
probably a
I've probably
lot.
made 1,000 mistakes, but
I made like the cardinal mistake the first time I published in 2004. I was young and just excited. I was like, oh, I got to get this into people's hands. I wrote this thing. It's so neat. And I wrote it, and then I read it, and I hit print. There was no editor. There was no designer. The cover was awful. The book was so poorly written and so riddled with mistakes. And so when I talk, people come to me a lot during book signings and ask me questions because they're new writers. And one of the first things I tell them is like, I know you're excited. It's totally cool. Like, I get it. You're really, really excited. But when that draft is done, please make sure you get the right people on your team to read your books and edit them and make sure they're as good as they can possibly be. Because to me, writing books, it's all about the intrinsic value more than anything. And so you, as a writer, you need to have that that book has to be as good as you believe you could have possibly made it, because that way, whether it sells one or a million, you'll still have that pride and joy of holding that book and seeing that book and going, I made that. And that only comes with all the grind after the fun work is done, right? So
Mhm.
uh, and I know my wife says I'm a perfectionist because I'll find one typo in something I've done and I'll be like, oh, this is garbage.
Yeah, yeah,
Despite
yeah.
the fact that I don't feel that way whenever I pick up books and I read them and I find a typo, which I find all the time, even in traditionally published books. It never bothers me to find a typo or two because I get it. I'm in the industry. I know how things happen. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely like the rushing things out. That's always like that was my biggest mistake when I first did it. It was terrible.
Anything else that you'd want to relay to writers who are maybe beginning their journey?
Yeah, take your time when it comes to. I feel like building a team is really important. You need an editor that is the right editor for your book. I feel like I'm lucky. I'm in the industry. I know a lot of people who write and edit, and I handpicked people for a reason because I thought they were the right people to understand my humor. They were the kind of people who would want to pick up my book. My humor is very. I write humor, so it's very, it's hit and miss. Some people love it, some people will hate it.
Yeah,
Uh, so I think part of finding the right editors and the right artists, please support Canadian artists if you can, if you have the budget to create, cover designs and cool inside artwork. You know, I've I you know, I believe very firmly that they're part of my team. I love the people I've worked with as far as
right.
illustrations go and stuff, and I feel like they bring a lot of value to it that, to me, AI wouldn't, but that's me.
Yeah,
And I know that not everyone has that budget. I get that. You do what you can. But also when you decide to market your book, I think please take the time to speak with people and kind of flush out the right opportunities. And nobody has unlimited dollars for marketing, especially as an indie author. And it hurts to put in dollars into something that doesn't work. I get it. I I've tried a wide variety of things. I've cast a wide net over the years, and I've had some simple, fairly inexpensive things work okay, and I've had some very expensive things not work at all. So,
yeah.
so
Don't I know that?
yeah, and it's tough, right? You're throwing, you cast your net out and see what you catch, right?
Yeah,
It's tough, but you got to really think hard about what you're looking to get from your marketing dollars. And that's not necessarily book sales. It might just be exposure. It might be other things, right? But you
yeah,
really have to look hard at it and decide whether or not whatever that cost is makes sense for what you want.
yeah.
I think that's really important.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you for that. So, Andrew, I want to thank you for your time. And the very last question is, where can my listeners find out more about Andrew Snook? Where can they find out more about Canadian Independent Publishers, the magazine?
So the magazine is at CanadianIndependentPublishers.ca. If you want to find out a little bit more about me, there's a little bit about me in the About Us section. I'm in the middle of another rebuild of my own site, but I have my own snookbooks.ca site for fiction. It's very basic right now. It's just kind of showing you, but if you want to know a little more about the books or where to buy them, it's there right now. Websites are like the bane of my existence in some ways. I
No,
wish
fair enough.
I wish I knew more about how to put them together myself.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. And there'll be links to that in the show notes at
Oh, awesome.
starkreflections.ca. But just give us the elevator pitch for this humorous novel, Remy's Dilemma.
Sure. So it's all about Remy, who has a premonition of the world coming to an end. So he decides to go on a quest to answer man's greatest question. And he ends up on a ridiculous road trip through Ontario and Quebec, where he causes total chaos everywhere he goes. And he ends up attracting the attention of a criminal profiler with the Toronto police, who profile Remy as a serial killer, even though he's not. And it generates a big manhunt for him that Remy's totally oblivious to the whole time he's on his quest. And you don't get to find out what the question is until the end when he finds the answer. And the whole thing's
Oh,
just designed to make you laugh. And that's so it's just like a light, fun read. Book two, Remy gets arrested for crimes he's not aware he committed in the first book. And as the police come to take him away, he gets swooped up by a shadow arm of the government who has also misprofiled Remy, but as a criminal genius. And so, for Remy to earn his freedom, they set him out on a bunch of shadowy deeds across Western Canada, in which Remy creates global scale chaos. And in the third book, Remy ends up all over Atlantic Canada, saving the world from chaos he's not even aware he created, without realizing he's saving it.
I love this. Remy is as Canadian as the Tragically Hip in terms of the content from across the country.
Well, all my work over the years as a B2B editor took me all over Canada into all sorts of small pockets of towns and cities, and I was all over the place. And so I kind of took advantage of that. So everywhere Remy goes is somewhere I've been myself. Even though it's like quite often it's kind of a sillier version of that place, but it's got like little nuggets of truth for people who've been there just for their own entertainment, right? So
Yeah, lovely Easter eggs for. Oh, I know what he's talking about there. That
yeah,
sounds
exactly.
amazing. Andrew, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it.
Okay, before I get into the details about the forum where you can get involved, if you're a Canadian author, stay tuned. I'll give you some information on how you can get involved and how I can potentially help you get engaged in this writing contest or advertising your books in this magazine, which I think is kind of cool. So, the first reflection is I love how Andrew works with the time that he has to write. Like he talked about getting up early. He talked about writing when he was on the road for work, everywhere on planes, trains, and automobiles and hotel rooms and airports and all those things. And then even writing with a pen and a pad of paper when his son wasn't sleeping and he needed to sit up watching some shows in the middle of the night. He took advantage of that opportunity, sat with his son, and got that other writing done. It reminds me of a quote that I have long admired from Hugh Prather that goes, if the desire to write is not accompanied by actual writing, then the desire is not to write. And that's been a long time mantra for myself and obviously for somebody like Andrew who kind of makes that time, finds that time, squeezes it in wherever he can. The other thing that I really wanted to touch upon and reflect upon was how he saw a gap in the market and he did something to try to fill it and fix it. And I'm always in awe of people who see that there's something missing, and instead of just bemoaning it and instead of complaining about it, he does something. So Dao Wong, who runs the Toronto Indie Author Conference here in Ontario, saw that there wasn't stuff for Canadians. So he's like, hey, I'm going to invest my own money and time and energy to do this. I want to bring something for Canadians, which is amazing. And Andrew saw the same thing. He said, there's not a lot for us Canadians in the independent sphere. And he is passionate about supporting writers and independent bookstores and independent publishers. And I think I mentioned earlier the difference between an independent publisher and an independent author. And as an independent author, you are an independent publisher, but I'm talking about when coming from working in the book industry for 30 plus years, when I talk about an independent publisher, I'm thinking about smaller publishers who aren't international conglomerates. They're not associated with the big five. They're independent. They may be regional, etc. And they do behave a lot more dynamically, very similar to indie authors. One of the main differences between indie authors and independent publishers is indie authors tend to typically think in digital first and print on demand options, whereas independent publishers typically think of print first and doing full print runs, offset print runs, warehousing, shipment with sales reps to sell their books into the traditional bookstore market, and online and ebooks are secondary. So that's usually the divisive factor, not the divisive factor, but the dividing line in terms of my use of those terms. But I love how Andrew wants to support indie bookstores, indie publishers, and indie authors, and created this beautiful magazine. And so that's why I want to, and this is now as I segue into the Woofu form that I've created, and there'll be a link to it in the show notes at starkreflections.ca, where if you're interested in advertising your books, I have a form where you can share up to 3 different books, load the book cover, etc., etc. I'm going to take as many as I can fit. I'm gonna try to buy either a half page or a full page ad and spotlight some amazing indie Canadian authors. I'll do the design, I'll create the ad, and then that way I can include as many of you as possible. Depends on the number of titles I get, so they may be smaller thumbnails, they may be larger thumbnails, whatever. But I just think I want to do something I want to give back to this awesome community because of the generosity shown to me, because again, we lift one another up. And so that's the one thing. And again, my apologies to anyone who's outside Canada. This is for my Canadian listeners as well. Don't worry, there'll be plenty of things I want to do for listeners from other countries as well, but I want to do this one thing, especially because it's also going to help support Andrew and support some writers at the same time. And then the other thing is, again, for Canadian writers, if you're interested in the flash fiction contest, if you've never entered a contest like that as a writer, especially if you're, an indie author and you've never done that sort of thing, I'm going to pay for the first 4 people who indicate, yeah, I'm interested in that. And what I'll do is then I will say, I'll get your name, I'll get your email, I will give Andrew the money, and I'll say, okay, these 4 people are going to submit something to the flash fiction contest, and it's on me, it's covered. And I please hope that there's some of you who are thinking about it. Take advantage of that. It's so much fun. I mean, I've written a lot of short fiction over the years, and even been in some flash fiction anthologies and entered projects and contests like that. And it's such a different element of writing that I think it's good for authors to experience. And again, I can only do that because of the generosity of my awesome patrons and my coffee buddies like Nikki, who are very generous and share with me, and I want to share back with my awesome listeners, with you. But that's it for my reflection. That's it for this promotion of Canadian Independent Publishers magazine. I'm going to be out. This is going to be it. I'm going to end this episode, but don't worry. I will be back like I am every single Friday and have been every single Friday for the past 7 years, because I love this podcast. I love this community, and I'm very, very passionate about it. And I'm so thankful that you're here. If you want to support the podcast, leaving comments, sharing it on social media with, particularly sharing it with people that you think would find value in the podcast, that really helps me in a tremendous way. And thank you to those of you who have done that. You can also leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because reviews, as authors know, often really can help other people find and discover great content. But as I said, that's it for this episode. Until next week, and until next episode, this is, as always, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, wishing you, as always, dear writer, great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.